All right, welcome Maximilian Payu to the Nootralize podcast once again.
Thank you, David.
How has your day been?
It has been a bit slow this morning, but now we're speeding up things.
You had a cup of coffee?
Yeah, some food, some delicious food,
Mm-hmm.
and a great discussion.
About mindfulness, actually.
Yeah, meditation practices.
Yeah. We were talking about how, in my experience, doing longer meditation sessions will yield a higher return on the invested time.
Yeah.
And you said, if I recall correctly, that you're going to try it?
I might try it. I mean,
Yeah.
the hard part or the issue is that, like, I have been experimenting with, or like I've been doing like 2 hours a day before, and like in periods, and then I've done like 30 minutes a day in periods, and now I'm down to like 10 minutes. But I'm not sure like what is the difference between those, like those kind of practices. So it's hard to say, but I mean I'm open to experimenting always, of course. The thing is I'd like to be able to somehow say something about it. So maybe journaling could be one of those ways of like saying something about how I'm feeling.
Right. How do you think that maybe even journaling, but some sort of a test for this specific instance could be implemented into the Nootralize application so that we can enable people to really find out if, for example, a daily 10-minute meditation session in comparison with a weekly 2-hour meditation session, which one has the best impact for certain measures, I guess.
Right.
How do you think that we could implement that?
I mean, one effect that I have been observing in my own experience when I've been doing like longer sits is that I catch myself more frequently during the day, like throughout the day, where I sort of wake up, and become present, not by sitting down, but just sitting at a computer or whatever, I don't know, on the train. And I wake up and now I'm present, and I can think of the thought pattern I was in or whatever. I think that happens more frequently when I've been doing these longer sits. So I guess that would be like one question that I'd ask myself in a test that I'd take. Right. Like, did you wake up or did you become present
during the
day?
Like
what was the frequency of that? Let's say.
Makes sense. Yeah. So I guess then just a scale with no limit to how many times you could wake up during a day.
Yeah.
Which is the value, and then you can see over time on a graph and have some statistical analysis of this change over time. How much more often do you wake up during a period when you do meditate, and what sort of meditation is the most effective for helping you become less stuck in your ways and thinking patterns?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be like a test for me. Right.
And so that is something that we could actually have ready for our users in like a couple of weeks when the first iteration of the login feature is completed, because then we can let our users create this label for themselves. Let's say they want to count the number of times that they wake up during a day.
Yeah.
Then they can do that. They can label their number count that they just create as a test in the Nootralize app as number of times I woke up today.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that those, like, the tests that you can create those tests yourself, and they don't have to be rocket science, like, I don't know, reacting to digits on a screen or whatever. You can just have a number of questions and a scale or a range. You pick.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Right.
Doesn't have to be more complicated.
Yeah, exactly. If you're very specific and have only one label, and that means something very specific to you, then you don't really need to validate it and to make sure it's reliable. So you don't need to test the test itself in a scientific manner. Instead, you can just use it because it is very specific. It's not trying to make any generalized conclusions to other people or other situations. It's trying to test something very specific, and then you yourself in your mind can create the label for what it is that you're testing. So the reliability aspect of testing will be accounted for by your own mind through just knowing what it means, the test. Yeah. But the primary topic of today's conversation was supposed to be, and is supposed to be, and is going to be the new study on Ubiquinol for reduction of mild fatigue in healthy individuals.
And I think this is like interesting, really interesting to me, because I think this was the first time that you mentioned, oh, there's a new article like recently, very recently published.
Yeah.
And that like put me in this like excited state
Yeah.
where like, oh, okay, wait, so there is like a lot of science being published like continuously.
Yeah.
And how do you like stay on top of that?
Yeah.
Because like most of the compounds that we have, I mean, some of them are really like extensively studied, but some science, I mean, if there are only like 2 or 3 articles on a compound and they may have like conflicting results, then like adding more evidence onto that will like tip the scale on like to one of the tip the scale basically.
Yeah.
So like how do you keep on top of this science?
Right.
It's like that's the question that's spun up in my head.
Yeah. And it has been really hard for just the average consumer to stay on top of the latest science as regards nootropics, for example, and supplements in general, but of course we are mostly interested in nootropics. That's why we want to provide this service via our blog, our podcast.
Our recommendation engine.
Yeah, the study will be, of course, if it meets our inclusion criteria, included in our recommendation engine. That is true indeed as well. But we've created this automated way of becoming notified. So we receive alerts. We at Nootralize receive notifications from PubMed when...
PubMed is a publishing platform, or what do you call it?
Yeah, it's a database for studies, I'd say. So when a new study is published, it's usually included in PubMed, and when it is included in PubMed, we will become aware of it. We've set up a system so that happens automatically. And that means that we can inform our users when there are new studies on any specific nootropic, such as this study on Ubiquinol, which came out 4 days ago. So yeah, I think it has been quite hard to, as an average consumer, understand the latest science and to be aware of the news as regards science and studies on nootropics. But this is something that we're trying to solve.
Like, wouldn't it be amazing if, let's say, you have stated in, let's say, in our application that I'm using whatever compound 2 times a day because the science has said that like this should be effective, and let's say you've been using it for 2 months or whatever, and you like your results have been inconclusive, and then perhaps there's some new study that says if you use this dose instead of this compound, you'll have a much better effect. And you'll get notified because you have like stated that you're using it, so we'll just send you a notification or email that says, okay, so now we have this new study, so try this instead. And like success,
indeed.
Basically.
Indeed. So of course there is a lot of research that needs to get done on nootropics for us to be able to make the best decisions, to use them in the right way, to use them in the right dosages, to use them at the right times. And that is something that we want to be part of creating through gathering data on our users and helping the scientific community to understand nootropics better. But we can also, of course, use the data from the scientific community to help our users. So we can connect these two groups of people, the scientists and our users, and both will get a win-win situation. So shall we dive into the study?
Yeah, let's do it.
The study was a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial, and that means if it is on healthy people, if it is on healthy people and placebo-controlled, then, and if it observes measures of cognitive performance or physical performance, then it will be included in our recommendation engine. So this means that this study is included in our recommendation engine, and I've already entered the data into our database, so it's now if you listen to this podcast, you can go into our application and the study will be included in the recommendation engine. So this study, as I said, is placebo-controlled, but one of the exclusion criteria for the study was that the lead researcher, the principal investigator of the study, was allowed to judge the participants for suitability. This raised some eyebrows for me. I was surprised by this.
Like how many eyebrows?
Just
kidding.
I only have 2, so no, but I was quite surprised by this because usually you don't want subjective judgment in objective studies if it's possible to not have it. But on the other hand, the grouping of the participants was randomized, which means that if the researcher who judged the participants for suitability wanted to alter the results through selecting certain participants who would be expected to respond very well to these interventions, then that would be observed in the placebo group as well, because participants who were expected to respond well would be in the placebo group as well, and then the difference in the effects from the baseline to 4, 8 or 12 weeks, which were the time points of measurement in the study, in comparison with placebo would have been more. So I'm going to simplify because I can tell that you're not really
right.
following.
So we're talking about like the quality of the science, right? And like this researcher qualifying participants before they like the participants that were in the study, that were qualified by this lead researcher. But so what was the criteria for that? Like if you'd say I want to research the effects of this compound in adults, wouldn't that be a sort of qualifying factor? Like you wouldn't pick elderly for that study, right?
Right. So there were like 7 or something like that inclusion criteria, and then 9 other exclusion criteria as well. So this was just like a final exclusion criteria. There were loads of other exclusion and inclusion criteria as well, such as the participants are not allowed to take any other medications or have any other diseases.
Right, but those are like
Objective.
no, but I mean those are common to like say that the study was conducted on
Exactly.
healthy human beings, so they couldn't have like they weren't allowed to have a disease. Like none of the participants had a disease.
And in my experience of reading studies, this is the first time I read this as an exclusion criteria. I have, however, not read the exclusion and inclusion criteria for every study, because it's not required for the work of entering the data from the study, because we can conclude whether or not it is fit our inclusion criteria even without reading the study's exclusion and inclusion criteria. So we don't actually have to read them in order to determine whether the study is of interest to us.
Okay.
So I'm not sure whether that is a common thing to do, to have the lead researcher determine whether a subject is suitable. But it does open up the possibility for bad science through selecting participants for some variable that they shouldn't be selected for.
But I mean, for sure, this, like, human beings, or like, we have become better, or at least from what I understand, we have become better at doing science.
Mm-hmm.
Like, as the years have progressed, I mean, now we're doing like statistical analysis, and we're doing baseline testing and placebo control and everything.
Mm-hmm.
So why do you think, like, was this choice to have this kind of exclusion criteria, was that, do you think it is harmless, or because you said now it opens up to potentially being bad science, so why would they do that? Do you have any ideas about that?
Well, I think that they did have in mind that the randomization was going to occur for all the participants anyway, so that any systematic errors in the selection of participants would be solved through randomization.
Right.
Yeah. But you don't want any systematic errors in selection of participants anyway. So I do think that maybe they were just humble and thought, I don't know, or we don't know what may occur in these participants that may mean that they are not a fit for the study, that we don't have included in our exclusion and inclusion criteria. So maybe they were just humble and said to themselves, we really don't know if there may be some odd feature of any of these participants that we cannot predict. So let's just include this exclusion criteria as a safety measure to prevent the bad science that would follow from including outliers.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why I think that that was probably the reason, I believe.
I mean, because it seems like they've checked all the other boxes for like solid science in this study, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Should we move on to the dose that they used?
Let's go.
Yeah. So they used 100 and 150 milligrams. There were 3 groups in the study: 100 milligram group, 150 milligram group, and placebo group. 20 participants in the placebo and 100 milligram group, and 150 milligram group. In that group there were 22 participants. And the active compound was, of course, ubiquinol, as we mentioned. If you compare these doses with how much you usually consume through your diet, for example, beef is rich in ubiquinol. This is a much larger dose than you could possibly achieve. Like, I don't think that it's possible to get this much through your diet.
Well, you have to consume like 10 kilos of meat or what?
Yeah, or maybe even hundreds.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. So to try to increase your dietary intake of ubiquinol is probably not going to have a significant effect comparable to that which was found in this study.
So what were the... Can we jump straight to the results, or is there any...
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so what were the results?
Right, so baseline tests and the scores for the tests at baseline were not present in the study. They didn't present it for every measure except for serum ubiquinol and digit symbol substitution tests.
Okay, and those are tests for what?
For serum ubiquinol, the researchers are trying to figure out, is this supplement actually getting into the participant's body?
Okay.
Yeah. Is it bioavailable? And for the digit symbol substitution test, it is a measure of visual speed of information processing. So it could probably be applicable for the speed of reading or following along in this conversation in regards to then specifically maybe body language, and also to follow along if you are in school and your teacher is presenting or something like that.
So wait, what did they, like, what was the title of the study? What did they, like, they're using this compound and they want to see, or the hypothesis, what was it, the hypothesis? Like, what were they expecting? What kind of results?
So the title was something along the lines of something to the effect of ubiquinol 10 is effective in reducing mild fatigue in healthy individuals. So their primary goal of the study was to figure out, is ubiquinol effective for reducing fatigue, and fatigue has a very specific meaning, and that is after cognitively demanding tasks, as regards the specific aspect of fatigue that is mental fatigue, which was what was tested in the study. So there are several aspects of fatigue, such as mental fatigue, physical fatigue, etc. And in this study they tested only mental fatigue. So they were interested in seeing, does ubiquinol reduce the dip in energy levels after cognitively demanding tasks? So will you get fatigued quickly, essentially?
Okay. Yeah.
And that is then also a factor in your cognitive performance, your continuous cognitive performance. If you fatigue, then you can't really focus and have bad attention, etc. So they tested fatigue levels before the cognitively demanding tasks and after the cognitively demanding tasks, and saw that the placebo group did improve slightly over time. But so did the ubiquinol groups, and they improved more.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. However, on the digisimple substitution test, which was the one that I mentioned about visual information speed of processing, there the study results were that the placebo group did have a better performance at week 8 and week 12, and I think week 4 as well, in comparison with the ubiquinol groups.
So inconclusive results.
Well, I should say all of the groups had an increase in performance. So the placebo effect and the learning effect, the practice effect of retaking the test, knowing what to look for, knowing how to perform in the test, those two effects, rather than the supplementation, were the factors influencing the results.
Okay.
As regards the digisymbol substitution test. So as regards cognitive function, ubiquinol may not have in these doses at these time points much of any improvements, much of any benefits. But however, they did find that subsequently, so afterwards, after the cognitively demanding tasks, the ubiquinol groups had better motivation, had better levels of relaxation, and had better energy levels. So I label energy levels, I label fatigue as energy levels. I equate them, even though they're not exactly the same academically and scientifically. Like, if you want to really go down to the definition, there are slight differences, but essentially they are the same. So energy levels, motivation, and relaxation were all improved after cognitively demanding tasks. So essentially, endurance of cognitive performance may be improved by ubiquinol consumption.
Okay. So do you know how they measure that?
Yeah, as I said, they started the testing sessions with testing fatigue, motivation, relaxation, and then they did the cognitively demanding tasks, and then they tested the different groups.
Yeah, but how did they test the energy levels or the?
That was through a fatigue scale, so a visual analog scale, so the subjective measures, and then also a subjective self-report measure, I should say. And then there were also the objective measures of autonomic nerve function.
What does that mean?
Well, it means the neurological function of which you don't have conscious control, essentially. So it is quite important in levels of relaxation.
Like how do you test for that? I don't I can't visualize how you would test that.
Well, I think that they used a something called an actigraphy, something along those lines, in which the participants, because this wasn't a measure of interest to the Nootralize app or to the Nootralize users really, because they couldn't use it at home probably. I didn't really dive in deep to what it is.
I understand, yeah.
But essentially, some measurement device was used to measure the physiological responses to or physiological relaxation.
So what could that be, like giving them some stimuli to look at and then tracking the pupils to see like how fast you react to something appearing?
Perhaps you could do that.
Yeah.
What they did do, I remember from reading the study that they did put something above their head, I think, and then measured how. I think they measured heart rate variability actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But those measures weren't the primary ones for the researchers either. They were really just used as secondary measures which would enable theorization behind the effects of ubiquinol. So they had some hypotheses of how ubiquinol might work. So for example, through reducing reactive oxygen species, for example.
Yeah, I was gonna get to that. Like, what were the motivation behind, like, why ubiquinol?
Right. They have seen in a study on people with chronic fatigue that they have less ubiquinol in their bodies, in their, I'm not sure if it was serum or plasma, but in their blood. They have less ubiquinol.
Okay, so why would they have less? Like, does the body in some way break down that compound more, like, faster pace for those people, or is it that they're not consuming enough meat, or isn't there an effect of like vegans claiming that, like, since having less meat they're feeling more fatigued, or vegetarians? No, okay.
I'm not sure. All I hear from vegetarians and vegans is the extreme of those populations. I'm not interacting very much, except for a few people, with people who feel fine and don't notice much of a change. I only have like the extremes.
Right.
And those sometimes say that they get much more energy actually, in my experience.
Yeah. Okay, so never mind that.
Yeah, inconclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so they've seen that this ubiquinol is less of lesser concentrations in people that are suffering from chronic fatigue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they're theorizing that, and this is like, it's like, how did they like construct it? I don't know, produce it.
The what?
The compound, like the concentrated version of it. Like, you could.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I assume it's some sort of chemical synthesis.
Yeah, it's not like extracting it from beef.
No.
No.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Do you have any other questions regarding the study?
No, it's just like it's interesting, like how like I've never heard of ubiquinol before, and like where did that come from? Like, how do they motivate?
Yeah,
studies?
Perhaps you've heard of CoQ10.
Yeah, I have.
You have, yeah. So ubiquinol is actually one of several forms of CoQ10. So ubiquinol is CoQ10.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of many forms of it. What does that mean?
Ubiquinone as well, I think.
Okay.
So 46% of the dietary intake of CoQ10 was through ubiquinol in a Japanese population.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does it, like, CoQ10? It's coenzyme. No.
Q10. Yeah.
Q10. Okay.
Yeah.
And the Q is for what? Stands for what?
I'm not sure.
Quinol.
Quinol, perhaps.
Who knows?
Yeah.
Okay. No, but I think it's just interesting. Like, how do you motivate, how do you motivate why you're doing this research?
Right. So
it's really interesting.
Yeah. I could go a bit more in depth about that if you want.
Yeah, sure.
So how the researchers motivated this study was that, as I mentioned, people with chronic fatigue syndrome have, which is a disease. They have lowered levels of ubiquinol in their blood, in this study at least, that they refer to. And they then wanted to figure out whether through an experiment, through an intervention, not through observation, or I should make the contrast, the distinction I'm trying to make here a bit more clear. This was an experimental study, not an observational study, which was the only evidence that has been available, to my knowledge at least, on the fatigue relieving effects of ubiquinol. So the aim of the study, the present study that we're talking about, was to figure out whether ubiquinol might relieve fatigue through supplementation, which may then transfer to a treatment for chronic fatigue syndrome, which is probably the goal, I believe, of like the researchers' goals are primarily to help diseased people.
But you could theorize that like using ubiquinol could be very useful for even healthy human beings who'd just like to raise their energy levels, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was what was found in this study, but we are still lacking research such as when to take it and how to take it, like how much, and perhaps there is an even better form of CoQ10. Like there are a lot of answers that need to be found for questions regarding how to effectively use ubiquinol or CoQ10 to enhance your energy levels and as a healthy person.
So how would you use this information today to experiment?
Right. I actually used CoQ10 in like 30 milligram doses before, and I did experience, and I used it for like 3 weeks maybe, and I did experience a slight boost in energy levels. Not very significant though, and I do recall it being slightly, it had some effects on my cognitive function that just put me off my game a little bit, which made me quit using it. And seeing that they use, since these effects that were found in the study were on ubiquinol use at doses of 100 and 150 milligrams, which is a lot higher than I was using. Perhaps I could try that as well, but since I did have some cognitive side effects, I believe that I will not be using it in quite a while personally, because there are so many other nootropics I'd rather experiment with.
Right. Okay.
So that's my personal integration of this information.
Yeah, sounds safe.
Yeah, I think so.
We like safe.
Yeah, but it is very important, I think, to take this anecdote of mine for what it is. It is an anecdote, one person.
Right.
If you compare the quality of the evidence that I just laid out of my experience in comparison with the evidence found in this study. This study is more than 20 times as good.
Right. So what did the study actually say about side effects then?
No adverse effects. No
All
side
right.
effects.
So
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah. Exactly. So, and these side effects that I had, they were transient, so they disappeared after discontinuation of use, and they were very mild.
Okay.
But when I asked myself, well, should I continue with this, at least I used to ask myself, is this something that I want to do every day for the rest of my life? And to that question, the answer was no for Ubiquinol for me. However, I have changed my mind on that a bit and do find acute effects interesting once again, which I used to do before and then quit being interested in, and now I am again.
But I mean, okay, maybe this doesn't apply now, but even finding out that a nootropic isn't effective for you is good information, right?
Yeah.
Because there's no point to paying that money to have to use that nootropic if it's not effective for you.
Right.
So no results are good results, basically.
Yeah. If they are true results, if you have good quality results, then they are good results.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really cool. So I mean, I love this like scientific way of like it makes so much sense to use the science to as a guiding as guiding information to what you're gonna use. Like if I'm reading like an article on ginger, for example, like ginger is amazing for everything. If you read, if you're googling it, like what are the health effects of ginger, then it's gonna say like, it's great for everything. You're gonna be the most healthiest person.
Yeah.
But I mean, where's the science, please? Like.
Yeah, and even this is my experience of how it has become lately. Even if you Google something such as ginger and you get a science-backed article, you only get like one side of the coin and then maybe one small section for the side effects and very little consideration of the quality of the evidence. So even if it is science-backed and it does have references to studies, it's very skewed in what sort of information is in the article for education.
Because I mean, like one part of this is like the companies that are selling supplements, they like to sell a lot, right? They want to make money.
Yeah.
So any evidence that points to a supplement being useful or having effects, they're gonna promote that.
Yeah.
But they're not really interested in the science saying that it doesn't have any effect or even having like side effects.
Yeah.
So you have to take that into consideration.
Yeah.
Like use all the science, not just pick the good science or the things that you deem good, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think it's great that you bring up that point, like as regards the marketing of science, you should be aware of this because it's not only a problem as regards publication bias, like in the scientific community, where a lot of studies based on like meta-analytic techniques of bias, so analyzing statistically the publication of studies, researchers have concluded that it is a very prevalent phenomena that studies don't get published because of the results.
Right, yeah.
But the problem isn't only in the scientific community. It also exists as regards which studies are selected for propagation into the public consciousness through marketing.
Marketing of products, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just like a double filter of studies showing no effects.
I'm just thinking, like, how could you, like, take that into calculations when you're, like, let's say you're gathering a lot of science, which all say, like, oh, this is amazing for this effect, let's say, and, like, would there be a way of, like, taking into consideration that there might be a number of articles that were not published,
Right.
that had, like, maybe inconclusive results?
Yeah.
That would be good, but I just don't see how you do that.
Yeah, it's very
Would be
hard,
tricky,
and it's close to impossible as a consumer today.
right? Is there any science on, like, because you said there is a prevalent effect? Is there any science on that? So, like, the publication bias?
Yeah, if you read a meta-analysis or a systematic review of a nootropic or of a nootropic on a specific cognitive function, its effects on a specific cognitive function, then usually the researchers will include an estimate of how biased the studies were and how prevalent publication bias was for these studies. So how many studies they expect were not published.
Okay, yeah, that's cool.
So reading systematic reviews and meta-analyses for nootropics is something I'd recommend that people do. But also I hope that we can implement this in the future to the Nootralize application so that we can have publication bias both in our recommendation engine but also on nootropic pages as something that we somehow display to educate people about how good the quality of the science actually is.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
That's like the future.
Yeah. It is.
Okay. Should we cut it short or
long?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this episode has a good end here.
Yeah. So thank you for coming on to the podcast, David.
Thank you
talking
for
with
having me on.
Thank you.